Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host. And today, 2 days after the second year anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war, I am going to identify 10 geopolitical, geoeconomic consequences of the Russia-Ukraine war. The war is having a profound impact on global politics, on the structure of global politics, on the nature of multilateral global governance. It is dividing the world, it is rebalancing the world, and it is creating situations which were not anticipated. So the unintended consequences of this war, I think, are going to have a long-term impact, not only on global politics, but also on global governance. I'm going to identify 10 consequences. I may leave out some, but these are the 10 more important consequences that I see. The war is creating winners and losers. I think that the biggest losers are obviously Russia and Ukraine. But along with that, I also think that the Western-led international liberal order is also a loser. And to some extent, even NATO is a loser. So the losers are Russia, Ukraine, NATO, and the global order. And the winners are India, China, and Iran, nations which are either through counter-hegemonic and anti-systemic moves or through working with the system, seeking to revise the global order and change the structure and balance of power in world politics. So before I identify what those 10 specific consequences are, please subscribe to Khanversation, like this video, press the bell icon so that you get notifications about new videos that I may post. If you want, you can help Khanversations by joining Khanversations, but surely do share it with your socio-political network. So the first consequence that I think that the Russia-Ukraine war has caused, it has more or less divided the world into two blocks, both in geopolitical terms and geoeconomic terms. It's creating also two trading blocks with two different sets of rules. So the weaponization of SWIFT and other multilateral institutions which were created to benefit all, the US has essentially weaponized them to advance Ukrainian, NATO, and US interests. So by just weaponizing them, it has undermined these institutions and forced the world to divide itself into two worlds, those who are working with Russia directly or indirectly, like Iran supplying weapons, like India and China buying Russian oil and keeping Russian economy afloat and sufficiently rich so that it can continue with its war. But the consequences of the Western response in terms of sanctions and the attempt to economically isolate Russia and to cut down its revenues from its exports has essentially had an uneven impact. I mean, those who seem to care about Ukraine for whatever reasons, I see them as civilizational and racial reasons. The passion with which Western leaders condemn every international relations legal violation by Russia is not seen in the same case when Israel systematically and more egregiously violates the same rules and laws. So it's not about rule and law. To me, it is more about race and maybe even religion. So because of the way the West has abused the multilateral system, countries have been forced to work around it. And in the process of working around it, that is trading with Russia, helping Russia, and in the process creating alternative ways of trading to the point of even embarking on de-dollarization and trading in yuan and dirham, etc. So in that sense, one of the biggest consequences of this war is an emergence of two geopolitical blocs, East and West. East, obviously, composed of countries like India, China, and Iran, which are directly or indirectly helping Russia. And the West, obviously, led by the United States and its European allies. The second consequence of this is that it has exposed NATO's double failure. NATO not only failed the expansion of NATO eastwards, which Russians claim is the trigger for this war, NATO's power, NATO's capabilities, NATO's economic and military strengths have not deterred Russia from invading Ukraine. So Russia's invasion of Ukraine essentially says, even though Ukraine was not part of NATO fully, it was a strategic partner, and NATO was doing all kinds of exercises and capacity building in Ukraine from 2008 onwards. And the commitments, even before the war from the West to support Ukraine, did not act as a deterrence to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the second is, for the last 2 years, NATO has been unable to defeat Russia, unable to isolate Russia, unable to make it a pariah nation. And just last week in the G20 foreign ministers event in Brazil, you could see Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov enjoying the same privileges that Antony Blinken was enjoying at the G20 summit in Brazil. And so the photographs, the videos that have come from that convention shows that Lavrov was getting the same kind of attention, including private meeting with President Lula, just like Antony Blinken. So NATO has not only failed to defeat Russia in 2 years, but also failed to isolate and make Russia a pariah nation. The third consequence of the Russia-Ukraine war is it also exposed Russia and how fragile Russia is and how weak really Russia is. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, the world in general, including Western experts, had a much higher conception of Russia's military capabilities. I remember 2 years ago when we were sitting on panels discussing Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there were experts who had been studying Russia for decades who were predicting that Ukraine would fall or crumble within a week or two. And now it's 2 years and Ukraine continues to stand, of course, with billions of dollars of aid from the US, Canada, and Europe, and also unlimited supply of weapons and training, and advanced weapons and intelligence from West, but it has stood there, and Russia has failed to literally materialize the perception of the strength that it has. The fourth consequence of the Russia-Ukraine war has expedited the rise of BRICS. BRICS is an alternative to the concept of G7. G7 is a group of 7 rich liberal democracies, United States, Germany, France, Canada, Japan, and so these 7 countries are considered as G7. Italy is also one of them. These are essentially the core of the contemporary West. And of the top 10 economies today, 7 are from G7 and 3 are from BRICS, that is India, China, and Brazil. So these, the very fact that the West was abusing the multilateral system and all international institutions to advance its own self-interest has created this perception for other countries, especially rising economies all over the world, including Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, that the West will not allow them the full autonomy that they seek. And so they will have to find alternative institutions to grow and to thrive and find partners to cooperate on dealing with problems that they think are of higher priority. The West always prioritizes Western agenda and undermines everybody else, such as forcing poor countries to suffer economic distress by disengaging with Russia without caring about what will happen to their people and what will happen to their economies just to advance Ukraine's interest. So groups such as BRICS have become much more stronger and much more appealing. Last year, 30 countries wanted to join BRICS, and 5 countries did join them. So one of the unintended consequences of this war is, I think, the growing appeal and power and size of BRICS. One of the consequences, another consequence of this 2-year Russia-Ukraine war, and this is the fifth one, is the rise of India. India has benefited significantly economically. So what India has done is it has emphasized its strategic autonomy while during the 2 years, it has improved its relationships with the US. Prime Minister Modi was received as if he was a global emperor by Joe Biden and Jill Biden. The red carpet was spread. He was just celebrated at the White House like no other leader in a long time. And this is while India was clearly acting against US interests in Ukraine by buying Russian oil. In 2023, India bought $37 billion worth of Russian oil at a discount. And then much of it was also exported back to Europe at a much higher price. So India is not only keeping Russia's economy afloat to a great extent, but is also making money from this while also making sure that Western sanctions on Russia fail. So not only is India able to take steps to basically subvert Western foreign policies towards Russia, but is also able to benefit from it and also is celebrated by the West in spite of doing these things. So that is an underlining of the growing importance of India as a global power. So the fifth consequence of the Russia-Ukraine war is the emergence of India as a very important player, both in the East and the West, capable of both strengthening the system while also demanding a change to the system. The sixth consequence of the Russia-Ukraine war is the rise of Iran. The United States has spent a lot of energy, a lot of foreign policy capital in trying to isolate Iran, to weaken it, to impose sanctions on it. The worst and the most powerful sanctions regimes ever has been imposed on Iran. But in spite of that, Iran is emerging as a regional power. Iran is helping Russia with its weapons. Iranian drones, Iranian missiles are being used by Russia to bombard Ukraine day in and day out. Iran has become sufficiently powerful enough to challenge U.S. Navy in and around the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Houthis, who are fully armed by Iran, have made the cost of international trade increase exponentially. It is feared by economists that what the Houthis are doing to the trade, or the shipping trade that goes through Suez Canal, and now is forced to go all around Africa, is basically could lead to a global inflation, resurgence of global inflation like it was during the COVID era. It is undermining the existing structure of supply chains and forcing Britain and the US to continue with naval and military exercises in the region, draining resources, draining goodwill, and creating more enemies. So the sixth consequence of the Russia-Ukraine war is the rise of Iran, and the US, like with Russia, has failed to isolate Iran. In 2023, Iran became a full member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and was one of the 5 countries to become part of BRICS. So Iran has become a very important player in the alternative bloc that is emerging as a result of the division of the world into East and West, or West and the rest, whichever way you like, you could classify them. That also, I think, is a major failure of US foreign policy, as well as the manner in which the US is not really defending the global order and the rule-based order that it loves to talk about. The war has also caused divisions between the US and Europe, especially when Donald Trump said that if he won and became president, he would not provide the same support to either NATO or Ukraine. And he would force countries to increase their spending to 2%, which is what they're supposed to do in Europe. Not only that, but he actually even called for Russia to do whatever they like with countries that do not contribute 2% of their GDP to their own defense. So this clear signal from Donald Trump that he's not going to be as supportive of NATO as Joe Biden is. Joe Biden doesn't seem to care about America. He's so obsessed with Europe. He's done nothing for the border of the United States, and he's just pushing to send. I mean, the number one thing, and perhaps the only thing he has been doing for the last 4 months, is desperately trying to send $15 billion to Israel and $60 billion to Ukraine. This seems to be the only two things that he wants to do, and this is the only two priorities that he has for America. And when Trump signals that this is not going to be, Europeans are paranoid that he would abandon. So there is a schism between US and Europe that this war has caused. And as a result, because there are many Americans, and you can see the division between Democrats and Republicans. The House Republicans are not eager or desperate to go and send $60 billion after already sending over $100 billion to Ukraine. The Democrats, of course, are dying to send. I mean, I'm sure they would even cut Social Security if they could to send money to Ukraine. So the division is not only between US and Europe, but also between Democrats and Republicans. But what is also interesting is that these two wars, which are out there, the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas war, which is magnifying the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war, is also creating divisions within the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So you can see the Republican senators eager to send money to Ukraine, but not the members of the House. And you can see in the Democratic Party as to how 70% of Democrats are completely opposed to Biden's foreign policy towards Gaza. It appears that Joe Biden is implementing MAGA policies towards Gaza and not the policies of his own party. So these are these peculiar divisions in the West and within the Western countries and Western society that have been caused by the Russia-Ukraine war, which could have an enduring impact on the nature and quality of democracy in the West. One of the other consequences, let me count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The eighth consequence is accelerating the demise of existing multilateral system, primarily because the US is constantly weaponizing it. I think the multilateral systems like SWIFT and others, which have existed and served the world really well for the last 70 years, are now becoming weak because the US is weaponizing it. These are not US foreign policy instruments. They were supposed to be properties of the whole planet, of all countries. The United Nations is not an extension of the State Department. It is a forum where the world expresses its will. But the US is continuing to undermine it. Look at the last US veto on a ceasefire call by, it was 13-1, with Great Britain abstaining, and the rest of the world voting in one direction and the US using its veto in another direction, clearly making the UN Security Council irrelevant to world security. So one of the things that this war and its effects are, like I said, magnified by the Israel-Gaza war, is basically undermining the multilateral system, but it also exposing that the West's talk about rule-based order, about democratic values are all quite hypocritical, because the very values that they espouse in the case of the Russia-Ukraine war, those are the very values they undermine, ignore in the Israel-Hamas war. So when they can talk about genocide in say, in China over Uyghurs, genocide even in Ukraine, they are completely paralyzed morally when it comes to criticizing Israel in this horrible genocidal war in Gaza. So this hypocrisy and these double standards are not only weakening international global norms, international human rights regimes, the credibility of the United States and the credibility of the global order that the US underwrites, but it is also having an impact on the quality of democracy in the US. The US is becoming an illiberal state, going after its own domestic forces, which are daring to speak up, going after college students, the way Harvard was targeted, shows that in pursuit of these limited interests, which is supporting whatever Israel does, doing whatever is necessary for Ukraine, the US is willing to destroy the international order as well as democracy, freedom of speech, freedom to associate, basically some of the fundamental elements of the Bill of Rights at home. And finally, I do want to talk about the this consequence, the final consequence, besides it's connected to the illiberalization of America, is Biden's foreign policy is today, I think, clearly an anti-democracy foreign policy. He promised us a policy that would make human rights and democracy at the center of his foreign policy. And it is clearly that nothing is further away from Biden's concerns than human rights, etc. He is sponsoring, supporting, financially, and legally defending a genocidal war in Gaza. This also empowers Russia and also makes Russia's position more acceptable to the global South, because they can see that both Russia and the United States essentially do not care about international norms or values. So suddenly they realize that we are living in a world where there is no normative order really. It's just those who have power will get what they want, and those who do not have power will not get what they don't want. Those of you who are interested in this should read the Million Dialogue, and you will understand what I am suggesting about the perceptions that the Global South now has about what the US is doing in the region. So these are the 10 consequences of that I see as consequence of the 2-year Russia-Ukraine war. The winners clearly are China, which has benefited very much because it is now emerging as the leader of the alternate world. If China can't be the leader of the world, it'll divide the world into two and be the leader of half of the world. Russia has become more and more dependent on China, and if India continues to play both sides of the battle, then Russia will probably trust India less and align more with China, because if India continues to have very close relations with the US, how can it continue to also have good relations with Russia, especially when US is determined to destroy Russia and its economy. So in that sense, China is a big winner. It is clearly emerging as an alternative to the United States as far as the global South is concerned. India too has become a much more prominent player. India has to be careful with how it aligns with both sides. This multi-alignment cannot really work if the divisions between these two sides increase profoundly to the state that we enter a Cold War. Even during the Cold War, even though India maintained that it was non-aligned, it was much, much closer to the Soviet Union than it ever was to the United States. So it is not really possible to be fully neutral or fully multi-aligned when the world becomes extremely polarized. And of course, another winner is Iran, which the US has failed to isolate. It has become more powerful than it ever was in the last 30 years. So I think these are significant consequences, and I think that they are going to have a transformative impact on the global order. I don't know what is going to emerge, whether we are going to move into an era of no order or will there be a new world order. But one thing that is clear is the international liberal order, which was so dominant since 1991, is clearly fading away and very fast. I hope that this conversation makes you think a bit more about world politics, whether you're in business, whether you're in academia, whether you're in media, whether you're a student. The consequences of this war are going to eventually impact your life. So please share this with your friends and your social political network. Think about it. Do watch it again if you think that it is beneficial for you to get a better understanding of world politics. And if you haven't subscribed to Khanversation yet, please subscribe to Khanversation, like this video, press the bell icon, and share this video. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Take care.